Hi, gang. It's not quite 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and guess what? The power went out here. I wanted to take this time to do this vlog because I wanted to discuss, not only share with you my day, share with you what God really did for us today, but I also wanted to dig a little further about Daniel chapter 1. I have kind of some study questions I wanted to pose to you, and see if you can feel free to get back to me and share with me your answers. Share with me what you think with this. I really found this chapter very interesting. I've always found the book of Daniel extremely interesting. And this particular chapter is very interesting because it really speaks out a lot, as I said yesterday, about taking a stand for your faith. But not just, taking a stand, but there was also a few other things concerning this that I really, really wanted to share with you a little bit more. And to, maybe we could discuss. I would love to have some discussion. I really, really would. Part of what I'd love to discuss with you is about Daniel and his three friends, about the environment they were in, and kind of give a little background on it, so that maybe you could understand the situation, the things that they were experiencing. One of the things I see in here, because I'm reading, this through the through a couple of commentaries, is some very important things, to say the least. I don't know how else to put it, but there's some really awesome things here. I love going through commentaries because commentaries are so awesome, because you learn so much from them. And one of my favorites, I know a lot of people like Matthew Henry's, I find that a little too long-winded. I really do. But I wanted to share with you, what I learned a lot out of this. And I mean an awful lot. And I wanted to share some stuff with you. Stuff that I think, especially from my own personal study, throughout the years. It's interesting here when it comes to this. You see, first off, in verse 1, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. So bottom line here, this is in the 3rd year. Apparently, from where else I've read, this was because Jehoiakim rebelled against him. If Jehoiakim would have humbled himself before the Lord and, how do I put this, submitted himself to Nebuchadnezzar, I think a lot of things could have been avoided. That's my perspective. But, people don't learn. And it says here that basically, in verse 2, Jehoiakim was delivered right into Nebuchadnezzar's hand, lock, stock, and barrel. And it says here during this 3rd reign, and there were apparently some, this was one of the first deportations, as they call it. I think there was another one. Sorry, that's my husband coming in. But basically, this was something very interesting with this, because, as I said, remember what we were talking about yesterday about the moral decline of Israel. This was the result of it. And I wanted to focus a bit on Daniel and his three friends and the things that they were facing. And I love the Asbury Bible commentary because it really makes things not just concise, but you learn things that you never knew. Basically, this happened in 605 BC, this first deportation. And the temple was plundered during this time. Now, the Jerusalem was completely destroyed in 585, if memory serves. So basically, Daniel, along with a lot of others, they were carried into captivity as a hostage. It wasn't just simply a hostage. This was, as I said yesterday, Babylon's foreign exchange program. You went whether you wanted to or not. And they did everything they could to to enforce their way of life on these young people. They did everything they could to enforce their way of life on these young people and to make sure that it was, what they learned was their way, bottom line. And as I said, they went so far as to even change their names. They changed Daniel's name to Belteshazzar. And Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, they changed, of course, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And as I said, this was an attempt to strip them of every aspect of their identity. And one of the things that they were faced with was being offered food. And a lot of the food and drink in Babylon, they were offered to idols before they were consumed. And as I said before, Daniel and his 3 friends, they had humbled themselves before the Lord and repented of their own individual sins. And they made a choice to live for God no matter where they were or what happened to them. They chose to live for God. That was it. And according to Mosaic law, it prohibited the Hebrews from eating any food that was offered to idols. So you read in here in this that Daniel went to Melzar and asked for a different diet. That was probably the most difficult thing to do. I mean, the absolute most difficult thing to do. Because he could have been told no. But Daniel did this in such a respectful manner. He was bold on this, but he showed respect to his handler. Because it says here in verse 9 that God had brought Daniel into tender and favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs, and this man's name was Melzar. And Melzar responds to him and says, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall ye make me endanger my head to the king. So he's like, I want to, but there's a problem here. If I do this and you guys start looking decrepit and any aspect of unhealthy, the king's going to have my head. So he wants to really help Daniel out, which I find that is really good, because he could have said, no, I'm not going to do this. But Daniel went about this the right way. And because Daniel purposed in his heart, as well as his 3 friends, to not do this, and because he went about this the right way, because this was his proposition to Melzar. He says, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Now, pulse was fruits and vegetables, and of course normal water. And he says in verse 13, then let our countenances be looked on before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat the portion of the king's meat. And as thou seest, deal with thy servants. In other words, he says, give us 10 days on this diet. If we don't look healthy, you find anything wrong with us physically, we'll eat whatever you put before us. And that was a very good proposition, don't you think? Because I really do. And because of this arrangement, and because at the end of that 10 days, that Melzar saw that they had been granted by God better health, wisdom, and understanding than anybody else among the hostages, the guard allowed them to continue eating the foods that were allowed by God. And it's interesting later on that when Nebuchadnezzar met them, he basically declared that they were superior to all of his advisors, the existing advisors he already had, who were in the royal court. And this is very interesting, where this is a first of a series of events in which these young men committed themselves fully to God. And it had such a profound impact on the other leaders that God used them mightily to be witnesses to these pagan kings, especially Daniel. And I kind of wanted to ask, one of the questions today. I wanted to ask you one of the questions and see, what you feel free to, send me your response and, tell me what you think. But this is one of the questions. When you look into this and you read this, ask why did Daniel refuse to eat the king's food? That's one thing right there. And really, like I said, when you're reading this passage, ask yourself that. And also, something else too. I'm wondering myself, have you ever been asked to compromise your principles? Was there ever a moment where you were asked, coerced, or somebody tried to get you to do something that you knew was against God's word, and they tried to intimidate you? And I'm also wondering, not only that, but what happened? How did you react? How did they react? I've had a few instances myself where that's happened, where I was asked to compromise my principles, where I had some instances. I had a couple of them. One in particular was when I was a store manager. I discovered that my co-manager had a problem with prescription drugs, and she tried to get me to cover it up. She kept, especially a week before Christmas, she was constantly calling me to come in to cover her shift because she was too stoned to come in. I put my foot down on it in a very polite manner. One Sunday, I refused to answer my phone. I wasn't around. I purposely made myself not around. Well, when I got home from church, spending pretty much most of the day at church, I had some nasty phone messages from this woman. And this woman knew that Sundays I was in church. And I was faced with a very, very big decision. It just so happened that I had the phone numbers to the district manager and corporate. I didn't want to have to do this, but the next day when I came in there, she made some false accusations against me. I came in there to basically confront her on her situation. I told her that she needed help, and I wasn't going to cover for her, and she got very upset, and she falsely accused me of insubordination, yelling at her, which never happened. I walked away. I didn't come back. And I immediately called the district manager because I knew then I had to say something. She was basically trying to get me to not say anything, and I refused, and she got mad. And the end result was basically she did get in trouble. It wasn't right away, but she did. And the end result was the company went out of business. I hear it got revived. I'm not sure how, but it did. And I had another situation where I was asked to lie. And it was while I was working for a company that I had been with for almost 10 years. The person wanted me to lie about a product, and I refused to. and he intimidated me. He threatened my job. I went over his head to the person who runs the entire program. And this supervisor was forced to apologize to me. I did things the right way. I've had moments where I do things the right way and I get retaliated against. But God has blessed me. And I know that there's something probably you're going through right now that you don't know how to handle, where you're being asked to compromise your principles. And I'd love for you to share that with me. And I also urge you to go to the Lord in prayer and ask Him for strength and wisdom to be able to resist the temptation to do wrong. And seek His face on it. And not be afraid to do the right thing. Go to respond to this in a respectful manner. But make sure that you are not compromising your own principles. That's something I give you a friendly challenge today. I challenge you to be able to do that. And I pray that God guides you, protects you in what you're doing. I've got to get going, but I wish you all a really wonderful evening, and if anybody's having power outages like us, we'll be praying for you. Bye for now.